A tall girl dropped a set of teas right in front of her house, and a man behind her just happened to pick them up. After the girl walked away, the man quietly snuck into her room. The decorations inside the room caught his attention, as there were all sorts of toys scattered around. The man had quite a bit of fun exploring. As he was about to leave, he accidentally found a pair of the girl's stockings, and to his surprise, there were 700 pounds hidden inside. With the money in hand, he and his friends went out to buy some new clothes, then hurried back to his hometown. A few days later, a group of police officers showed up. In the middle of the night, they kicked down his door and, in front of his parents, took him straight to the airport to be sent to the UK. The man didn't panic. He thought he'd only be locked up for a few months at most. However, he was sentenced to decades in prison. Not just him, but his father and relatives were also thrown in jail. His youngest cousin, who was just 17 at the time, came out of prison 15 years later, now 32. This man's name is Jerry, and he lived in the war-torn region of Northern Ireland. At that time, the Irish Republicans were fighting against British colonial rule. Young Jerry had nothing to do and spent his days stealing and causing trouble. One day, while stealing some scrap metal, he was mistaken by the British Army for a gunman. Panicking, he fled, inadvertently leading the army straight to the rebel base, causing a major conflict. Afterwards, he was caught by the rebel leader, but fortunately, his father had good connections and managed to rescue him. Fearing more trouble, his father sent him to live with his aunt in London. Jerry, already tired of his father's constant lectures, was actually relieved to be escaping his grasp. If it weren't for the fact that his father gave him every penny he had before he left, Jerry wouldn't have felt the slightest bit of sadness about leaving. Even his farewell was as simple as a quick goodbye after his father walked away. The feeling of separation didn't last long. As soon as Jerry boarded the ship, he ran into his friend Paul. It was Paul's appearance that would change his life forever. Instead of going to his aunt's house, Jerry followed Paul to a community where a group of young people lived aimlessly, exactly what Jerry was looking for. Though they lived on little to nothing, Jerry was content. Every time he called his father, he told him not to worry and assured him everything was fine. However, things didn't stay peaceful for long. After a dispute, Jerry was kicked out of the community. He and his friend ended up sleeping on a bench in a park, but were soon chased off by a group of homeless people. Through a brief conversation, Jerry learned that the old man was also from Northern Ireland. Being the generous person he was, Jerry gave the little money he had to the elderly man. After leaving the park, they ran into the tall girl who had dropped her keys earlier, and soon found themselves arrested. Jerry didn't think much of the arrest at first, but soon realized the reason they were detained was under the Anti-Terrorism Act. Just as he was saying goodbye to the homeless man, a terrorist attack took place just a few blocks away. Eager to make an arrest, the police quickly linked Jerry to the attack and labeled him a terrorist. Resistance was inevitable, and so was the beating that followed. The police subjected him to unspeakable torture, hoping to force a confession. A few days later, the officer in charge appeared, the only one who hadn't laid a hand on Jerry. Crying, Jerry begged him for help, claiming his friend and the homeless man could vouch for his innocence. The officer immediately brought in Jerry's friend Paul, but instead of offering hope, Paul urged Jerry to confess, implying he had already been forced into a false confession. It wasn't just Paul. Several other members of the community had also been arrested and signed blank testimonies. Even his father, who had just arrived in London, was detained. The police were determined to close the case quickly, and were using every trick in the book. They threatened Jerry, if he didn't confess, his father would be executed first. In an instant, Jerry was overcome with panic. Until then, he had been somewhat annoyed by his father. His father's actions always seemed like obligations, and he never really appreciated the love his father had shown him. But now, faced with the possibility of losing his father, he realized how painful it would be. Reluctantly, he signed the blank confession. A few days later, Jerry was sent to a temporary prison in the UK. His arrival caused quite a stir in the prison, with every British prisoner eager to greet the terrorist and his family. Jerry thought that by confessing, he could spare his family further harm, but it didn't take long for his father to be thrown into the same prison. Worse still, his aunt's family was also arrested for conspiring to commit murder. Now his father was his cellmate. While his father remained calm, Jerry couldn't accept this turn of events. He angrily accused his father of never supporting him when he did good things, but always being there when he made mistakes. Now, His father was in prison with him. His frustration grew as he felt he had never done anything to make his father proud, and that his life had been one mistake after another. His father silently listened, knowing that Jerry was actually feeling guilty for causing trouble for his family. Not long after, they were taken to court. Jerry and his friends sat there, thinking the court would clear their names and grant them justice, but those who wronged them knew all too well how innocent they were. Aside from their testimony, the gloves Jerry's aunt had used to wash dishes became key evidence in the bomb-making case. One by one, they were placed on the defendant's bench, with the British officers in uniform swearing to testify against them. It was clear who the judge would believe. The homeless man who could have proved their innocence was listed as untraceable. After a long trial, the jury delivered its verdict, and the courtroom erupted in cheers. Jerry and his friends were sentenced to life in prison, with no parole for 30 years. The others were sentenced to 12 to 30 years. They were sent to the UK's highest security prison, where the worst criminals were held. Jerry and his father received special treatment, kept away from the general population, and denied any outdoor activities. The British hated terrorists, and their appearance caused the prison to be filled with even more tension. While Jerry's father wanted to appeal, Jerry had already lost faith in the legal system. From that day on, his father never scolded him again. Instead, he treated him like a child, feeding him and comforting him every day, telling him not to lose hope. But the more his father tried to comfort him, the more miserable Jerry became. They were innocent, yet couldn't even leave their cell. Soon, Jerry started to spiral, mixing with the other Irish inmates and getting involved in illegal substances. His father noticed his behavior but said nothing, abandoning his usual lectures. Even when Jerry tried to talk to him, his father refused to respond. "You haven't said a word for 2 weeks. Those things will kill you," his father said. "I don't care. I'll die anyway." Jerry replied, "I'm sorry. I won't touch them again. As long as you're still here." Jerry added, "I don't want you to touch those things, whether I'm alive or dead." His father responded, "Okay, I won't do anything that will upset you," Jerry said reluctantly. Years later, the real terrorists were captured. The true culprit confessed everything, but the police refused to believe him. Or perhaps they couldn't afford to. Not long after, the true terrorist was transferred to the same prison as Jerry. When he arrived, he immediately asked to speak with Jerry. He knew that Jerry had suffered in his place. Unlike Jerry, the real terrorist wasn't so kind. He refused to eat in his cell and walked straight into the common area. When the British tried to provoke him, he fought back with all his strength. His defiance inspired Jerry, who had suffered under British oppression for years. Now, with someone leading the charge, Jerry couldn't resist joining the fight. Soon, more Irish inmates joined in. Afterward, MacAndrew, the true terrorist, found Jerry and his father and confessed the truth. The police knew the truth. But in this war, Jerry and his father were just 2 innocent victims among many. MacAndrew apologized, acknowledging that his actions had caused them to suffer unnecessarily. But Jerry's father refused the apology, saying that MacAndrew should apologize to the families of those he killed. He also asked Jerry to stay away from MacAndrew, as they were innocent people who shouldn't associate with criminals. Jerry ignored his father's words. His father was honest, principled, and always tried to live with dignity. But his father was also weak, and though he was always right, he suffered countless hardships because of his weakness. MacAndrew, however, was different. At least he dared to fight back. They'd only had one fight with the British, but now they had gained the right to move freely. Jerry was proud of this. MacAndrew told Jerry, "The British always have to fight to leave any place. In all colonies, they only retreat after they've been defeated." And prisons were no different. The notorious criminals in that prison, now under MacAndrew's influence, had become docile sheep in comparison. No one dared to bully the Irish anymore. And even if tensions flared, a simple smile would resolve it. Then, MacAndrew shifted his focus to the prison guards. He led the prisoners in protests, demanding more time out of their cells, thicker blankets, and even taking steps to seek justice for Jerry and his father. They hung bedsheets out of the windows with the words, "Jerry and his father are innocent," written on them. The protest made it to the news, and the police, fearing the truth might come out, quickly dispatched riot police. In the chaos, Jerry's father was injured. Soon after, social observers began visiting the prison. One female lawyer, intrigued by Jerry and his father's case, took an interest. However, Jerry still didn't trust the lawyer. He even wished she would stay away from them. Since the lawyer's arrival, his father hadn't seen his mother in 6 months. Jerry had given up his bi-weekly visiting hours to meet with the lawyer. While his father's health deteriorated, climbing stairs had become a struggle. Jerry didn't want his father to waste energy on something so hopeless. But, as it turned out, when it came to reading people, Jerry wasn't as astute as his father. The lawyer, Gareth, was one of the few genuinely righteous people, and he never gave up on seeking justice for them, even in Parliament. Their case was gaining attention. This gave Jerry's father renewed hope, and she wrote more frequent letters to advocate for their innocence. Soon, Jerry was moved by his father's persistence. He decided to appeal alongside him, thinking that maybe, together, they could speed up the process of reopening the case. The appeal process was long, and Jerry wasn't sure how much longer his father could hold on in prison. Their roles had shifted. Jerry was now the one caring for his father. They often reflected on their past lives during this time. From another perspective, they were fortunate few people get to live out their adulthood with their parents in such a way. The small prison cell allowed Jerry to witness his father's resilience, learning from him the true strength and dignity of life. Without these years together, Jerry might never have understood his father's strictness and expectations, but when he finally understood, it seemed too late. One day, out of the blue, his father told him he was going to die soon and was worried about his mother. Jerry urged him not to talk like that, comforting him with a promise to take care of his mother, but his father responded, "You can't even take care of yourself. How can you care for someone else?" In his father's eyes, Jerry was still a child. A few days later, his father passed away one quiet night, 12 years after they had been imprisoned. Come on, put your arm on me, that's it. Come on. The other inmates lit scraps of paper on fire and threw them out the window in honor of the quiet, misunderstood old man. Most of the prisoners were hardened criminals, but that didn't mean they couldn't recognize right from wrong. They all sympathized with the wronged elder. As the flames outside flickered in the air, Jerry found a reason to keep fighting. He decided to continue the struggle not only for his father's dignity but for the faint hope of justice. His father's death seemed to awaken more people who cared about justice. The lawyer-led protests grew larger, and even the prison guards began offering what help they could within their limited power. 3 more years passed. Just as Jerry was losing hope and on the verge of breaking, the case finally gained the attention of higher authorities. The lawyers were allowed to review the case files and restart the investigation, but the resistance they faced was much greater than anticipated. They were closely monitored, with each page they read being taken from them. Even their writing had to be done with the guards' pens, supposedly to prevent any tampering with the documents. They even transferred Jerry to a farther prison, making it harder for the lawyer to meet with him. As the court date approached, the lawyer still hadn't found any evidence in Jerry's favor. The possibility of overturning the case seemed almost non-existent, but the lawyer didn't give up. On the eve of the trial, she continued reviewing the files, and her persistence led to a breakthrough. The person assigned to monitor her took sick leave, and the lawyer seized the opportunity, requesting to review the documents again. This time, she discovered a file she had never seen before, marked with the words "Do not show to defense lawyer." The next day, the court convened. The retrial drew national attention, and the courtroom was packed with media and justice advocates. The police chief, representing justice, swore an oath just like he had 15 years ago, promising that everything he said was true. The lengthy trial began. The lawyer first presented the names of all the prisoners involved. By this time, except for Jerry and his friend Paul, everyone else had already served their sentences. Jerry's aunt had been in prison for 14 years, her husband for 12 years, and their youngest child had been 17 when incarcerated. He was 32 by the time he was released. They had spent their prime years witnessing the fairness or lack thereof of the legal system. The police chief, seemingly unfazed, sat listening, confident in his position, not caring about what the lawyer was saying. However, when the lawyer presented a photo of the homeless man, the chief's expression changed. Then, the lawyer revealed a testimony given by the homeless man before Jerry had been coerced into a confession. This evidence could have cleared Jerry's name, but it had been concealed, resulting in 15 years of suffering for the innocent, including Jerry's father, who had died in prison unjustly. The lawyer's words rang out, and the courtroom erupted in noise. Those who knew the truth began to panic, and even the judge lost his composure. If the lawyer was right, this case would tarnish the entire British judicial system's reputation. The opposing lawyer called for a recess, but under the watchful eyes of the public, the judge could not side with them and denied the request. The lawyer then presented the document marked "Do not show to defense lawyer," and gasps filled the room. In the face of irrefutable evidence, all attempts at defense seemed powerless. At that moment, a well-dressed man whispered something to the opposing lawyer. The lawyer then approached the judge and whispered in his ear. After hearing this, the judge ordered the police chief to leave the courtroom and granted the recess, because, above the law and justice, there was power that couldn't allow the police chief to bear the blame for the entire judicial system. If they let the chief go down, more scandals would spill out. The best option was to exonerate Jerry, but without admitting fault. Just as Jerry had thought before the trial began, the powerful would never apologize to ordinary people like them. After a brief recess, the court delivered its final judgment. However, it wasn't based on law, it was a royal pardon. The judge announced, "The case is dismissed. You are free to go."
Freeman, and I'm going out the front door.
Jerry responded, "I am innocent. I spent 15 years in prison for something I didn't do. I watched my father die in a British prison for something he didn't do, and this government still claims he was guilty. I will tell them until my father is proven innocent, until everyone involved in this case is proven innocent, until the real criminals are brought to justice. I will keep fighting for my father." The film ends on a bittersweet note. It had been 15 years from the time Jerry was arrested to when he was released without charge. It wasn't until 2005, 16 years after Jerry's release, that Prime Minister Blair officially apologized to the victims. However, the police officers who framed them never faced any real punishment, and his father's death remained a painful memory for Jerry. He always believed it was his fault his father died. He lived with this guilt until he passed away from cancer at the age of 60. A quarter of his life had been spent in torment, and the second half was marked by this experience. He had 2 mental breakdowns, attempted suicide multiple times, and sank into alcoholism. The £200,000 compensation and the royalties from a film adaptation were squandered in just a few months. The trauma had made it impossible for him to live a normal life. Even today, innocent victims continue to suffer. In the ongoing conflicts like the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Palestine conflict, countless innocent people continue to endure unimaginable suffering every day.